On a quiet Thursday afternoon in the small town of Brooksville, James Carter, a 54-year-old African-American man and former soldier, was walking home from his weekly therapy session. He had served 2 tours overseas and had been struggling with PTSD for years. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and the streets were mostly empty. James wore an old jacket with faded army patches on the sleeves. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, lost in thought. He passed by a small park near the edge of town where children played and teenagers hung out after school. Suddenly, he heard raised voices. A teenage boy and a woman were arguing loudly near the swings. James stopped walking. He didn't want trouble, but he had always believed in helping when he could. As he approached, the woman turned to him and said, "Can you believe this kid? He took my phone." The teenager, clearly nervous, denied it and backed away. Before James could say anything, a police car pulled up fast, tires screeching. Officer Daniel Porter stepped out. He was known around town for being aggressive and quick to use force. He looked at the scene, then directly at James. Without asking questions or waiting for explanations, Porter grabbed James's arm and pushed him against a nearby bench. "Step back," Porter barked. James tried to explain that he wasn't involved, that he was just trying to help calm things down. But Porter wasn't listening. His face was red, his grip tight. James raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. He spoke calmly, calling Porter officer and saying he was a veteran. But none of it mattered. Porter shoved him again, harder this time. James stumbled but stayed on his feet. Then, without warning, Porter swung his fist straight into James's face. The punch landed with brutal force. James's head snapped back and he fell like a tree struck by lightning. His body hit the ground hard, his head bouncing off the concrete. Blood started to spread across the pavement. The woman screamed. The teenager ran away. Bystanders shouted and rushed forward. Someone called 911 while others tried to check if James was breathing. Porter stood there, unmoving, his chest rising and falling quickly. He looked down at the unconscious man and didn't say a word. When paramedics arrived minutes later, they found James unresponsive. They loaded him onto a stretcher and raced him to the hospital. At Brooksville Regional Medical Center, doctors worked frantically to stabilize him. CT scans showed severe brain trauma. James had suffered a skull fracture and internal bleeding. He was placed in a medically induced coma to give his brain time to heal. The news spread quickly through town. By evening, people were talking about what had happened. Some were furious. Others defended the officer, claiming James must have done something to provoke him. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Johnson sat alone in his room scrolling through his phone. He was 16, a junior in high school, and lived with his mother, Lisa, in a small apartment above a laundromat. Marcus had grown up hearing stories about his father, how kind he was, how brave, but never knew much more than that. Lisa had always kept the truth hidden. She told Marcus his dad died before he was born. It was easier that way. That night, Lisa came home late. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She sat down beside Marcus and took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you," she said softly. Marcus looked up from his phone, confused. "Your father, he's not dead," she whispered. Marcus stared at her, stunned. "What do you mean?" he asked. Lisa explained everything, how she met James years ago, how they dated briefly, how she got pregnant, and how James left before she could tell him. She hadn't wanted to bring it up until now because she feared Marcus would feel abandoned. Then she told him the worst part. James had been hurt, badly. He was in the hospital, in a coma, after being punched by a police officer. Marcus couldn't believe it. He felt like the floor had disappeared beneath him. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice shaking. Lisa wiped her tears. "I was scared," she admitted. "I didn't want you to grow up angry." The next morning, Marcus didn't go to school. Instead, he went straight to the hospital. He followed his mom down the hallway to intensive care. His heart pounded as they entered James's room. Machines beeped loudly. Tubes ran from James's arms and nose. His face was bruised, swollen, and covered in cuts. Marcus stood frozen at the foot of the bed. He had imagined meeting his father many times, but never like this. Lisa gently held James's hand and whispered his name. "Please wake up," she begged. Marcus didn't know what to say. He had so many questions, but James couldn't answer any of them. That day, Marcus promised himself he wouldn't leave his father's side until he woke up. He didn't care what anyone said. James was his father, and he deserved a chance to be there for him. Back at the police station, Officer Porter sat in an interrogation room answering questions. His version of events didn't match the video footage that had already gone viral online. In the video, James is seen standing still, hands raised, saying nothing threatening. Porter approaches, shoves him, and then throws a single punch that knocks James out cold. There's no sign of resistance, no reason for the violence. The public outrage grew by the hour. Protesters gathered outside the station demanding answers. News crews arrived from neighboring cities. Social media exploded with calls for justice. People shared James's military photo, showing him proud and young in uniform. They reminded everyone that he had once worn that same uniform to protect the very country that now failed to protect him. Inside the hospital, Marcus stayed by James's side every day. He read to him, talked to him, sometimes even cried quietly when no one was watching. Doctors warned that waking up from a coma like this could take weeks, months, or might not happen at all. But Marcus refused to give up hope. As days passed, James remained motionless, unaware of the world spinning around him. But somewhere deep inside, maybe he could hear his son's voice. Maybe he could feel the love that had waited too long to find him. And maybe, just maybe, he would wake up and get the chance to make things right. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of machines and the soft hum of the air vent above. James Carter still hadn't moved. His face remained swollen, his breathing controlled by a ventilator. The bruises had darkened, spreading, like ink across his skin. Marcus sat in the same chair he had pulled up 2 days ago, his backpack on the floor beside him, untouched. He hadn't gone to school since learning the truth about his father. Lisa tried to convince him to go back, but he refused. "I'm staying," he said simply. She didn't argue. Outside the hospital, the town was beginning to change. News vans lined the streets, reporters standing with microphones in hand, speaking into cameras about the growing protests. People from neighboring cities drove in, holding signs that read, "Justice for James," and "Protect our veterans." Some wore military jackets, others carried American flags. A group of local students organized a sit-in outside the police station, demanding Officer Porter be fired immediately. The video of the punch had been shared thousands of times. It played over and over again on social media, each post carrying angry comments and painful questions. Why did this happen? Who is protecting us? Inside the police station, things were not going well for Daniel Porter. He had been placed on administrative leave while Internal Affairs launched an investigation. His badge and gun were taken away, and he was no longer allowed near the precinct unless called in for questioning. Other officers avoided him in the hallways. Some whispered behind closed doors. Others looked at him with something close to shame. He told himself he did nothing wrong. "He didn't follow orders," Porter muttered during one interview. "He could have attacked me." But the video showed otherwise. It showed a man who never raised his hands, who never took a step forward, who only tried to explain himself before being struck down. Back at the hospital, Marcus stayed focused on his father. He talked to him every day, sometimes reading out loud from books he thought James might like. Other times he just sat there quietly, watching his chest rise and fall. Lisa came and went, working double shifts at the diner to pay for medical bills and legal fees. They would need a lawyer soon, she knew. There was talk of suing the city, of taking the case to court. But for now, all they could do was wait. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops and painted the sky in orange and pink, Marcus leaned forward in his chair and rested his elbows on his knees. He looked at James's face and whispered, "You have to wake up, you just have to." His voice cracked, but he kept talking. "I don't care what happened before. I don't care why you left. I just want you here now." He paused, wiping, his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie. "I want to know you." Across town, Lisa met with a local civil rights activist named Karen Delgado. Karen had helped families in similar situations before, families who lost loved ones to police violence. She listened carefully as Lisa explained everything: how she met James years ago, how they fell apart, how she hid the truth from Marcus. Karen nodded, taking notes. "We're going to fight for him," she promised, "and we're going to make sure people hear your story." Meanwhile, the protests grew larger. More people joined each day. Teachers, nurses, even some retired soldiers showed up to stand in silence or speak at rallies. One older man stood on a speaker's stage and said, "This man served our country. He wore the uniform, and this is how we treat him?" The crowd roared in response. Chants filled the streets. "No justice, no peace. Say his name, James Carter." Inside the hospital, doctors gave updates to Lisa. James's condition hadn't improved much, but it hadn't gotten worse either. "There's still hope," one doctor told her gently, "but we can't predict when or if he'll wake up." Lisa thanked them, then walked back to Marcus's side. She watched her son sleep with his head resting on the edge of the bed. He looked exhausted but peaceful. She gently brushed his hair back and whispered, "We're going to get through this." At home, Lisa started sorting through old boxes. In the closet, she found letters James had written years ago, short, simple notes saying he missed her, that he was thinking about her. She also found a small photo of him in uniform, smiling proudly. She tucked it into her purse and brought it to the hospital the next morning. When Marcus woke up, she handed him the picture. "Here," she said softly. "This is who he was." Marcus stared at the image for a long time. He had seen pictures of soldiers before, but seeing his own father in one made it real in a way he hadn't expected. "He looks happy," Marcus said quietly. Lisa smiled sadly. "He was," she replied, "until everything got complicated." As the week dragged on, tensions in Brooksville continued to rise. Protesters clashed with police outside the station. Officers in riot gear formed lines to keep the crowd from entering the building. Reporters interviewed both sides. Some citizens supported the movement, calling for reform and accountability. Others claimed the officer was doing his job. "You don't know what he saw," one man argued on camera. "Maybe the guy was dangerous." Another woman shouted back, "He was unarmed. He was helping someone." Inside the hospital, Marcus began to feel more connected to his father. He asked Lisa questions about James's past, what he liked to eat, what music he used to listen to, whether he ever talked about having kids. Lisa answered honestly, sharing stories of late-night talks and walks in the park. She told Marcus how kind James was, how protective he was of her, how scared he became when she told him she was pregnant. "He didn't run because he didn't care," she said. "He ran because he thought he wasn't ready." Marcus listened closely, absorbing every word. He wanted to understand the man lying in the bed beside him. He wanted to know the father he never got to meet. At night, he dreamed of playing catch in the yard, of sitting around a fire, of hearing James laugh. But when he woke up, reality came crashing back. James still hadn't opened his eyes. Then, one morning, something changed. Marcus had fallen asleep in the chair again, his head resting on the bed rail. He woke up to the sound of a machine changing rhythm. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked at his father's face. Something felt different. He leaned closer. "Dad?" he whispered. There was no answer, but James's fingers twitched slightly under the blanket. Marcus jumped up and ran to the door, shouting for help. Nurses rushed in, checking monitors and adjusting equipment. "He moved," Marcus said breathlessly. His hand moved. The nurses exchanged glances. "That's a good sign," one of them said. "It means he's fighting." Lisa arrived minutes later, still in her work clothes from the diner. She rushed to James's side and held his hand tightly. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Come back to us." Marcus stood nearby, heart pounding. For the first time in days, he felt something close to hope. Outside, the protests continued. Inside, a battle was being fought, not with fists or voices, but with time, love, and memory. James Carter was still unconscious, but somewhere deep, inside he was trying to return, trying to find his way back to the life he had almost lost forever. The next few days were a roller coaster of emotions for Marcus and Lisa. James's slight movement had given them a glimmer of hope, but progress was painfully slow. His fingers twitched occasionally, and his eyelids fluttered as if he were trying to open them, but he remained unresponsive. The doctors explained that these small signs were encouraging. They meant his brain was attempting to regain control, but cautioned against expecting miracles too soon. It could take weeks, months, or longer, one doctor said gently. We just don't know. Lisa nodded, holding back tears. She spent every free moment at the hospital, bringing home-cooked meals she knew James used to love. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, collard greens, and leaving them in containers on the bedside table, even though he couldn't eat. It was her way of keeping him connected to life, to memories, to family. Marcus stayed by his side too, skipping school despite Lisa's protests. He didn't care about missing classes. All he cared about was being there when his father woke up. Outside the hospital, the protests grew louder and more organized. People from across the state joined the cause, marching through Brooksville with banners and chants. Local businesses donated food and water for the demonstrators. A makeshift memorial appeared near the park where James had been attacked. Candles, flowers, notes, and pictures surrounded by an American flag. Someone placed a pair of dog tags in the center, symbolizing James's service to the country. Strangers stopped to pay their respects, some kneeling quietly, others adding messages of support. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Porter was becoming increasingly isolated. Suspended without pay, he avoided public spaces, fearing backlash. Neighbors, who once waved hello, now ignored him. Friends stopped calling. Even his wife seemed distant, unable to look him in the eye during dinner. Porter tried convincing himself that he had done nothing wrong, repeating the same excuses over and over in his head. He wasn't listening. He could have been dangerous. But deep down, doubt crept in. Late at night, alone in bed, he replayed the incident in his mind, the shove, the punch, the sound of James's skull hitting the pavement. He told himself it was just another day on the job, but the guilt gnawed at him like a persistent ache. Back at the hospital, Karen Delgado visited Lisa and Marcus to discuss the legal battle ahead. Sitting in the cafeteria with cups of coffee between them, Karen explained the steps they needed to take. First, we file a complaint against Officer Porter and the department, she said firmly. Then we sue the city for negligence and excessive force. This isn't just about justice for James, it's about sending a message that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated. Lisa nodded, clutching her cup tightly. I just want him to wake up, she whispered. That's all I care about right now. Marcus sat silently, absorbing every word. He didn't fully understand the legal process, but he understood the anger behind it. He wanted answers. He wanted someone to pay for what happened to his father. Days turned into a week, and James showed subtle improvements. His breathing became steadier, no longer relying entirely on the ventilator. His eyes opened briefly one morning, though they darted around aimlessly before closing again. Doctors called it a positive sign, a step closer to consciousness, but warned that waking up didn't mean full recovery. Brain injuries were unpredictable. James might struggle with memory loss, speech difficulties, or mobility issues. Still, any progress felt like a victory. Marcus took advantage of these moments to talk to his father more than ever. He leaned close, speaking softly, so only James could hear. Hey, Dad, he began one afternoon. I know you're probably tired, but I need you to keep fighting. Mom needs you. I need you. We've got a lot to figure out together. He paused, biting his lip. Like, why you left, and why you never came back. But I'm not mad, okay? Just, please come back. Lisa watched from the doorway, her heart breaking and mending all at once. She wished she could shield Marcus from the pain, but she knew he needed this. to connect with the man who had shaped half of who he was. She stepped inside and sat on the other side of the bed, taking James's hand in hers. "James," she murmured, "you promised me once that you'd always protect me. Remember that? Well, I'm asking you to protect yourself now. Fight your way back to us." Word of James's condition spread beyond Brooksville. National news outlets picked up the story, highlighting not just the attack but also the systemic issues surrounding police brutality and racial injustice. Journalists interviewed veterans groups, civil rights activists, and local residents. One veteran shared how James had saved his life during deployment overseas. Another neighbor recalled how James used to help fix cars for people who couldn't afford repairs. These stories painted a picture of a man who gave selflessly, even after returning home broken. As the media coverage intensified, so did the pressure on the police department. Calls for accountability echoed nationwide. Protesters demanded transparency in the investigation and harsh consequences for Officer Porter. Some even called for defunding the police altogether. Inside the station, morale plummeted. Officers felt scrutinized, mistrusted, and unfairly judged based on one man's actions. Yet many privately agreed that something needed to change. One evening, while Marcus scrolled through social media updates, he stumbled upon a comment thread debating whether James deserved sympathy. "If he hadn't interfered, none of this would have happened," one user wrote. Marcus felt a surge of rage. Interfered? His father was trying to help someone. He clenched his fists, wanting to scream at the screen. Instead, he typed a response. "My dad is lying in a coma because he cared enough to step in. That makes him a hero, not a criminal." The comment received hundreds of likes within minutes, spreading like wildfire among supporters. At school, Marcus faced questions from classmates curious about his sudden absence. When he explained the situation, some offered condolences while others accused him of exaggerating. "Why should I care about some guy getting punched?" one boy sneered. Marcus swallowed his anger and walked away. He didn't have the energy to argue. Besides, he knew the truth. James Carter wasn't some guy. He was a soldier, a father, and a human being who deserved respect, not violence. Inside the hospital, the tension between hope and despair lingered. Lisa often prayed late at night, her voice soft but desperate. Marcus read aloud from books or played music he thought James might recognize. They refused to give up, clinging to each small sign of improvement as proof that James was still fighting. On the 8th day, he squeezed Lisa's hand weakly. She gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Did you feel that?" she asked Marcus, her voice trembling. He nodded, unable to speak. The following morning, James opened his eyes again. This time they focused briefly on Marcus, sitting beside him. His lips moved, forming silent words. Marcus leaned closer, straining to hear. "Dad?" he whispered. James blinked slowly, then closed his eyes again. It was fleeting, but it was real. For the first time since the attack, James had acknowledged his son. News of this breakthrough reached the protesters outside. Cheers erupted, echoing through the streets. People hugged, cried, and celebrated. It was a reminder that James's story wasn't just about tragedy. It was about resilience, unity, and the power of community. As Marcus held his father's hand later that night, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. James's progress was slow but undeniable. Each day brought new signs of life. His eyes stayed open longer, his hand squeezed a little tighter, and sometimes he even murmured faint sounds that hinted at speech. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, though they warned Lisa and Marcus not to expect too much too soon. "He's still very fragile," one doctor explained. "His brain has suffered significant trauma. Even if he recovers physically, there may be lasting effects." Despite the uncertainty, Marcus and Lisa clung to every positive change. They took turns staying by James's side, talking to him, reading to him, and playing music. Lisa brought in an old cassette player and loaded it with songs James used to love, classic soul tracks by Marvin Gaye and Sam Cooke. She pressed play and held his hand as the music filled the room. Marcus noticed how James's fingers tapped lightly against the blanket whenever a familiar tune played. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it gave them hope. Outside the hospital, the protests continued to grow louder and more organized. What had started as a small demonstration in Brooksville had now become a statewide movement. People from all walks of life joined in solidarity. Parents pushing strollers, teenagers holding handmade signs, veterans standing tall in their uniforms. The chant, "Justice for James," echoed through the streets like a heartbeat. Local leaders began addressing the crowd, calling for systemic reforms within law enforcement. One woman, a retired teacher named Gloria, stood on a makeshift stage and shouted, "This isn't just about one man. It's about every person who's been failed by those sworn to protect them." Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Porter was spiraling further into isolation. Suspended indefinitely, he spent most of his days alone in his house, avoiding eye contact with neighbors and ignoring phone calls from former colleagues. His wife Sarah pleaded with him to seek counseling, but he refused. "I didn't do anything wrong," he insisted stubbornly. Yet the image of James collapsing onto the pavement haunted him. At night, he woke up drenched in sweat, replaying the moment over and over again in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had crossed a line he hadn't realized existed until it was too late. Back at the hospital, Marcus found himself growing angrier with each passing day. He scrolled through social media, reading hateful comments from people who defended Officer Porter or dismissed James's suffering. "If he hadn't interfered, this wouldn't have happened," one commenter wrote. Another added, "Cops have tough jobs. They shouldn't be blamed for doing theirs." Marcus clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. How could they not see? His father wasn't causing trouble. He was trying to help someone. Wasn't that what good people did? One afternoon, Marcus decided to speak out. He attended a rally near the park where the attack had occurred. Standing on the same ground where his father had fallen, Marcus gripped the microphone tightly and looked out at the sea of faces. "My name is Marcus Johnson," he began, his voice trembling. "And James Carter, the man lying in that hospital bed, is my dad." The crowd fell silent, listening intently. Marcus swallowed hard and continued. "Some people are saying he deserved what happened because he got involved. But let me tell you something. My dad is a hero. He served our country. He risked his life for us. And when he saw someone in trouble, he stepped in to help. That's who he is, or who he was before someone decided he didn't matter." The crowd erupted in cheers, chanting Marcus's name. Tears streamed down his face as he stepped back from the microphone. For the first time, he felt a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about his father anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been treated unfairly, dismissed, or forgotten. He vowed to keep fighting, not just for James, but for anyone who needed a voice. Inside the hospital, Lisa watched videos of Marcus speaking at the rally. She felt a mix of pride and fear. Pride because her son was brave enough to stand up for what was right, and fear because she knew the road ahead would be difficult. As she sat beside James, she whispered, "You hear that? Your boy is amazing, just like you." James's recovery remained unpredictable. Some days he seemed alert, responding to touch or sound. Other days, he slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving Lisa and Marcus anxious and exhausted. Still, they refused to give up. Every morning, they greeted him with smiles and words of encouragement. "You're getting stronger, Dad," Marcus said one day. "We're waiting for you." Karen Delgado visited regularly to update Lisa and Marcus on the legal battle. She explained that the case against Officer Porter was gaining momentum. Witnesses had come forward, including the woman who had argued with the teenager in the park. Her testimony corroborated James's innocence. He had been trying to mediate, not escalate the situation. Video footage captured by bystanders painted a damning picture of excessive force. "We have a strong case," Karen assured them. "But we need to prepare for a long fight." As the weeks passed, James began showing clearer signs of awareness. He could track movement with his eyes and respond to simple commands, like squeezing Lisa's hand when asked. One day, he even managed to mouth the word water. Though his voice was barely audible, Marcus leaned close, tears streaming down his face. "Yeah, Dad. We'll get you some water," he said softly. It was a small victory, but it meant the world to them. Outside the hospital, the protests evolved into something bigger than anyone had anticipated. Activists from across the country arrived in Brooksville to lend their support. They organized workshops, discussions, and marches aimed at addressing systemic racism and police brutality. A mural of James appeared on the side of a local building, depicting him in uniform with the words, "A hero betrayed," written beneath. People gathered around it daily, leaving flowers, candles, and notes of gratitude. For Marcus, seeing the community rally around his father was both inspiring and overwhelming. He started attending meetings with civil rights groups, learning about advocacy and organizing. He met others who had lost loved ones to police violence, sharing stories and finding strength in their collective pain. "This isn't just about revenge," one activist told him. "It's about creating a future where no one has to go through what you're going through." As the legal proceedings gained traction, Officer Porter faced mounting pressure. Internal affairs investigators questioned him repeatedly, dissecting every detail of the incident. His colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to risk association with a man accused of such egregious misconduct. Even Sarah, his wife, began packing bags late at night, considering whether she could continue living with someone whose actions had caused so much harm. At the hospital, James took another step forward. One evening, as Lisa read aloud from a book of poetry, he whispered her name. It was faint, almost inaudible but unmistakable. Lisa froze, staring at him in disbelief. "James," she whispered back. His lips curved into the faintest smile before fatigue pulled him back under. Lisa cried quietly, overwhelmed with emotion. When Marcus arrived the next morning, she told him what had happened. "He knows we're here," she said, her voice breaking. "He knows we haven't given up on him." The news spread quickly, reigniting hope among supporters. Protesters cheered outside the hospital, holding signs that read, "James is waking up," and "Keep fighting for justice." Inside, Marcus and Lisa held on to each other, grateful for every moment. They knew the journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but for now, they allowed themselves to believe that James would pull through. Together, they vowed to stand by him, no matter what challenges lay ahead. James's recovery was like climbing a mountain, slow, grueling, and filled with setbacks. Some days he made remarkable progress, speaking in short sentences or recognizing familiar faces. Other days, he slipped back into confusion, unable to remember where he was or who the people around him were. Lisa and Marcus stayed by his side through it all, their patience tested but never broken. They celebrated every small victory, a smile, a word, a moment of clarity, as if it were a miracle. The doctors marveled at James's resilience. "Not everyone comes back from something like this," one neurologist admitted during a routine checkup. "His determination is extraordinary." But they also warned that full recovery might take months, even years. Physical therapy would be necessary to rebuild strength in his body, which had grown weak from weeks of lying immobile. Speech therapy would help him regain control over his voice, though there was no guarantee he'd ever speak as clearly as before. And then there was the emotional toll, the trauma of the attack, the betrayal by someone meant to protect him, and the long road ahead. It was a lot for anyone to bear, let alone a man who had already sacrificed so much for his country. Outside the hospital, the movement sparked by James's story continued to grow. Protesters marched daily, demanding accountability not just for Officer Daniel Porter but for systemic issues within law enforcement. Local leaders held town hall meetings, inviting citizens to share their experiences with police misconduct. Schools organized discussions about racial injustice and community safety. The mural of James on the building wall became a symbol of hope and resistance, drawing visitors from neighboring towns. People left messages of encouragement, prayers and promises to keep fighting for change. Marcus threw himself into activism, attending rallies, giving speeches, and meeting with organizers. He learned how to use social media effectively, sharing updates about his father's condition while calling attention to broader issues of inequality. His posts went viral, reaching thousands of people across the country. Strangers sent messages of support, offering donations for medical bills or simply thanking him for speaking out. At first, Marcus felt overwhelmed by the responsibility, but he soon realized he wasn't alone. A network of activists, veterans, and families affected by similar tragedies stood beside him, ready to help however they could. Meanwhile, Officer Porter's life unraveled completely. Suspended without pay and facing criminal charges, he struggled to find allies. His wife Sarah moved out, taking their 2 children with her. Friends stopped answering his calls. Even his own parents refused to defend him publicly, though privately they urged him to seek forgiveness. Porter spent his days drinking heavily, watching news coverage of the protests, and reading hateful comments online. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him like a boulder, crushing any sense of self-worth he once had. One night, unable to sleep, Porter drove to the park where the attack had occurred. He parked his car under a street lamp and sat staring at the empty playground. In his mind, he replayed the scene over and over again. James standing calmly, hands raised. The shove. The punch. The sickening crack of James's skull hitting the pavement. Tears streamed down Porter's face as guilt consumed him. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly see what he had done, not just to James, but to his family, to the community, to himself. He knew an apology wouldn't fix anything, but maybe it was a start. Back at the hospital, James began working with therapists to regain mobility and speech. Physical therapy sessions were exhausting, leaving him drained and frustrated. Simple tasks like lifting his arm or sitting up required immense effort. Speech therapy was equally challenging. Words often came out slurred or incomplete, making communication difficult. But James refused to give up. With Lisa and Marcus cheering him on, he pushed through each session, determined to reclaim his independence. During quieter moments, Lisa shared stories from their past, hoping to jog James's memory. She talked about their first date, the summer they spent exploring nearby lakes, and the dreams they once had together. Sometimes James nodded faintly, as if fragments of those memories lingered somewhere deep inside. Other times he looked at her blankly, struggling to connect the dots. It broke her heart, but she kept going, believing that love and familiarity might help piece him back together. Marcus, too, tried to build a bond with his father. He brought old photos and mementos to the hospital, showing James glimpses of the life they could have shared. One afternoon, he placed a baseball cap on James's head, explaining how much he loved playing catch when he was younger. "Maybe we can do that someday," Marcus said hopefully. James smiled weakly, squeezing Marcus's hand in response. It wasn't much, but it meant everything to Marcus. As the weeks turned into months, the legal battle against Officer Porter gained momentum. Evidence mounted, including witness testimonies, video footage, and expert analysis proving excessive force. Civil rights attorney Karen Delgado worked tirelessly, preparing for trial while rallying public support. She filed motions, attended hearings, and coordinated with national organizations advocating for police reform. "This isn't just about justice for James," she reminded everyone. "It's about holding institutions accountable and creating a safer future for everyone." The trial date was set and anticipation gripped Brooksville. Supporters planned vigils and marches to coincide with the proceedings, ensuring the case remained in the spotlight. Critics argued that the attention was unfair, claiming Porter deserved a fair trial without public pressure. But many countered that justice delayed was justice denied, and James had already waited far too long. Inside the hospital, James grew stronger with each passing day. He started walking short distances with assistance, his steps shaky but determined. His speech improved slightly, allowing him to express basic needs and emotions. Though his memory was still patchy, he recognized Lisa and Marcus immediately, smiling whenever they entered the room. Their presence gave him comfort, a reminder of why he needed to keep fighting. One evening, as Lisa brushed his hair gently, James whispered, "Thank you." It was soft, barely audible, but clear enough to bring tears to her eyes. "You don't have to thank me," she replied, choking back sobs. "Just keep getting better. That's all I want." Marcus hugged her tightly, feeling a mix of joy and sorrow. They were closer than ever, united by pain and purpose. Outside, the protests evolved into celebrations of resilience. Artists painted murals honoring other victims of police violence, turning Brooksville into a canvas of remembrance and hope. Schools added lessons on civil rights history, teaching students about the importance of standing up against injustice. Veterans groups organized fundraisers to support James's medical expenses, vowing to honor his service by ensuring he received the care he deserved. For Marcus, the experience transformed him. He went from being a shy teenager unsure of his place in the world to a confident advocate, determined to make a difference. He spoke at rallies, wrote essays, and collaborated with activists nationwide. Yet despite his newfound role, he never lost sight of his primary mission, helping his father heal. Every night he returned to the hospital, holding James's hand and whispering words of encouragement. "We're here, Dad," he said softly, "and we're not going anywhere." As winter approached, Brooksville braced itself for the trial. Tensions ran high, with both sides preparing for a battle that would shape the town's future. Lisa and Marcus knew it wouldn't erase the pain or undo the damage, but they hoped it would send a message that no one was above the law, and everyone deserved dignity and respect. For now, they focused on James, celebrating every step forward and praying for brighter days ahead. The trial of Officer Daniel Porter began on a cold morning in December, drawing national attention. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, cameras flashing as lawyers, witnesses, and supporters filed inside. The courtroom was packed. Family members, activists, veterans, and ordinary citizens filled every seat. Lisa and Marcus sat in the front row, their hands clasped tightly together. James was too weak to attend, but his presence loomed large over the proceedings. His story had become a rallying cry for justice, not just for him but for countless others who had suffered similar fates. Porter looked pale and gaunt as he entered the room, flanked by his defense attorney. Gone was the confident man who once walked the streets of Brooksville in uniform. In his place was someone broken, haunted by guilt and public condemnation. His lawyer argued that Porter acted within the bounds of his duty, claiming he perceived James as a threat, despite evidence proving otherwise. Witnesses were called to testify, including the woman from the park, several bystanders, and medical experts who detailed the severity of James's injuries. Each account painted a damning picture of excessive force and negligence. Marcus took the stand on the second day of the trial. Dressed in a suit borrowed from a family friend, he looked older than his 16 years. As he recounted the night he learned about his father's attack and the week spent watching him fight for survival, his voice wavered but never broke. "My dad is a hero," he said firmly, looking directly at the jury. "He served our country, and when he came home he tried to help people. That's who he is, or who he was, before someone decided his life didn't matter." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. When he stepped down, strangers reached out to shake his hand or pat his shoulder, moved by his courage. Lisa testified next, her testimony raw and emotional. She spoke about meeting James, falling in love with him, and the pain of raising Marcus without him. She described the moment she received the call about the attack and how it shattered her world all over again. "James deserves better than this," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He deserves to live in peace, not fear. He deserves justice." Her words resonated deeply, leaving many in the courtroom visibly shaken. As the trial progressed, the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence against Porter. Video footage showed the unprovoked punch, while expert witnesses explained how such force could lead to catastrophic injury. Civil rights advocates highlighted systemic issues within law enforcement, arguing that Porter's actions reflected broader patterns of misconduct. Defense attorneys countered by questioning the reliability of witnesses and emphasizing the challenges officers face in high-pressure situations. But their arguments felt hollow compared to the human stories unfolding before the court. On the final day of the trial, closing statements brought the tension to a peak. The prosecutor delivered a passionate speech, urging the jury to consider not only the facts of the case but also its implications. "This isn't just about one officer or one victim," he declared. "It's about accountability. It's about sending a message that no badge grants immunity from consequences." Porter's lawyer pleaded for leniency, portraying his client as a man overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his control. Yet even he seemed to lack conviction, knowing the odds were stacked against them. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on charges of assault and reckless endangerment. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the judge sentenced Porter to 10 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. Outside, cheers erupted as news of the verdict spread. Protesters hugged each other, chanting "Justice served," and waving signs bearing James's name. For many, it was a long overdue victory, a reminder that change, however slow, was possible. Back at the hospital, Lisa and Marcus shared the news with James. Though still recovering, he understood enough to grasp its significance. A faint smile crossed his face as Lisa held his hand and whispered, "You did it, James. You made a difference." Marcus nodded, adding, "People are standing up because of you, Dad. Because of what happened to you." James squeezed their hands weakly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. In the weeks following the trial, Brooksville began to heal, but not forget. The protests evolved into community-building efforts aimed at fostering dialogue between residents and law enforcement. Training programs focused on de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity were implemented for officers. Local leaders worked to address systemic inequalities, ensuring that James's legacy would inspire lasting change. For Marcus, the experience transformed him into a symbol of resilience and activism. He continued speaking at rallies, collaborating with organizations advocating for police reform, and mentoring young people affected by violence. His bond with James grew stronger as they navigated recovery together. Slowly but surely, James regained more of his independence, though scars, both physical and emotional, remained. Through it all, Marcus remained steadfast, determined to honor his father's sacrifices by fighting for a better future. Lisa found solace in rebuilding her relationship with James. Though their past was complicated, she cherished the opportunity to reconnect. They talked often, sharing memories and dreams for the days ahead. She knew the road to healing would be long, but she welcomed it, grateful for every moment they had. Officer Porter disappeared from public view, serving his sentence. Far from Brooksville, rumors swirled about his mental state, with some claiming he struggled with depression and regret. Whether true or not, few mourned his absence. For many, his conviction represented closure, not just for James and his family, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. As winter gave way to spring, Brooksville blossomed anew. The mural of James became a permanent fixture, surrounded by flowers and candles left by visitors paying tribute. Schools incorporated lessons about civil rights and activism into their curricula, inspired by the town's journey toward accountability. Veterans groups organized annual events honoring James's service and sacrifice, ensuring his story would never fade. For James, Marcus, and Lisa, life remained a work in progress. Challenges persisted, but so did hope. They leaned on each other, finding strength in unity and purpose in their shared mission. Together, they proved that even in the face of unimaginable pain, love and determination could spark meaningful change. And though the scars of the past would always linger, they chose to focus on the promise of tomorrow, a brighter, fairer world shaped by the courage of those who refused to stay silent.